Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. On this program, I want to talk about the extensive nature of World War III. Now, if you look at Ezekiel, that prophet is talking almost exclusively about Armageddon, whereas the book of Daniel is almost all about World War III. And a great deal of Revelation is also about World War III. Daniel and St. John describe this last great war as a battle between North and South and East and West, therefore indicating how extensive this terrible war will be. Let's look at Revelation chapter 18. In chapter 11, Daniel says that World War III will be precipitated when the king of the South, that is Barack Obama, provokes the king of the North, that is Vladimir Putin, into attacking the West. And we see this described in Revelation chapter 18, verse 8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned with fire, because strong is the Lord who judges her. Although communism will defeat capitalism, notice that this punishment against America and Great Britain primarily comes from the Lord God himself. And in verse number 10, we see the merchants weeping and moaning over the destruction of Babylon, standing afar off for fear of her torments, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is her judgment come. Now, St. John calls Babylon, that is the United States and Great Britain, a city. Some people mistakenly think that it must be a city like New York. But St. John often describes a city as a country and a country as a city and vice versa. This is not unusual for St. John to describe a nation as a city. And St. John continues in verse number 17. For in 1 hour so great riches have come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the sailors, and as many as work in the sea stood afar off. Now when you hear the false prophets say that Babylon is the Catholic Church, just have them read chapter number 17 in Revelation. Babylon is clearly a commercial enterprise. How can they say with a straight face that if the Vatican were bombed with a nuclear weapon, do you think the merchants of the world would stand afar off and weep and moan? I don't think so. And St. John continues describing the destruction of Britain and America in verse number 19. And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein all were made rich, all that had ships at sea by reason of her prices. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Notice in all these passages that the destruction is very sudden, because America and Great Britain's destruction comes in 1 hour. Daniel describes World War III as between the king of the North and the king of the South, as I mentioned, and also between the East and the West. St. John in the book of Revelation also describes World War III as between the East and the West. Let's look at his chapter number 9. Saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now I believe these 4 angels symbolize the 4 great ancient empires which controlled that region of the world at one time or another. That would be Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and of course the Roman Empire. All of these were world empires, and they symbolized world conquest. And that is what World War III will also be all about. And St. John continues in verse number 15, describing this East versus West phase of World War III. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. Now a third part of mankind would be 2 billion people today. And one of the reasons I believe this is the same as the North versus South war is because St. John uses this same phraseology, prepared for an hour and a day. I believe this is the same day and hour as when the Whore of Babylon is attacked by the scarlet beast. And in verse number 16, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 20,000 times 10,000, and I heard the number of them. I think this is a pretty clear indication that China will be involved in World War III. No one else could put an army of this size, 200 million soldiers, onto the field of battle. Now don't listen to the false prophets who say that this is part of Armageddon. This is not an invasion of Israel. This is an invasion of the West by the kings of the East. Chapter 16, verse 12. And the sixth angel poured out his bowl upon the great river Euphrates, and the water was dried up, that a way might be prepared for the kings from the east. Some people believe that the Euphrates will actually be dried up, but I believe this is more of a psychological barrier. And World War III begins when the great powers of the East, such as Communist China, decide to invade the Western nations of the world. So in conclusion, we need to remember that World War III is not the same as Armageddon. Armageddon comes at the end of the 7 years of tribulation, whereas World War III marks the beginning of the tribulation period. And as we can see from these passages from Daniel and Revelation, World War III will involve the entire world. And if you would like more information, simply write to the address you see on your screen.